Hi, welcome to tonight's virtual hangout. My name is Caroline Gilbert, and I'm a third-year viola fellow here at the New World Symphony. I'm from Bloomington, Indiana, and I got my bachelor's degree from Indiana, and then I got my master's from Juilliard. And tonight we're just going to be talking about efficient practice routines, how to practice, and what we do to sort of practice.
Yeah, so going off that, my name's Jarrett, and I'm a second-year tuba fellow here at the New World Symphony. I was born in a small town in southwestern Ontario in Canada called Windsor, and I did my undergrad at the University of Western Ontario, also in Ontario and London. Not to be confused with London, England. It's London, Ontario, so just to be clear. And I did my master's at the University of Michigan before coming here. So it's not only us talking about this topic tonight, we've also got a highly esteemed guest who knows a lot about efficient practice routines, and also happens to be the first associate concertmaster of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, whose name is Nathan Cole.
All right, thank you so much, and welcome to everyone who's here for the Hangout. Thanks for the introduction, and I'm really thrilled to be part of the New World Symphony Hangout. I've still never gotten to visit your guys' great new building, but I've known so many fellows ever since I was a teenager, really going to music camps and music festivals. So I love what you're doing. And yeah, we get to talk about practicing today, one of my favorite topics. Not always one of my favorite things to do, but
I think we can agree. Everyone agrees.
Yeah.
But I have gotten to enjoy it more over the years when I felt like I could take a bit more control of it and see my results more quickly. So, today we're going to talk, the title of it is Efficient Practice and then Efficient Practice Routines. And I think that for someone like me, who was impatient to see results, that's really gets to the heart of it. Because if you can't see and feel yourself getting better, it's hard to keep that motivation to go on, I think. So, when I think of efficiency and really fun practice, the very first thing I think of is goals, goal setting, because without that, I just would never practice. It's hard to just say, oh, I want to practice to get a little better. You want to practice because you want to get into New World, or you want to win a job, or you've got a gig or a concert or a competition coming up, and you're practicing certain pieces for certain dates and times. And when I was growing up and I had teachers, those goals were pretty much always set for me. And I think the danger comes when you make that transition, or you're about to make that transition to school or conservatory, or maybe you're just out of conservatory and you're the one that's having to set the pace and set the goals. And if you don't actively do that, you can see weeks and months go by where practicing gets less fun because you don't know what you're practicing for.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I don't know about you, but for me, that when coming to New World, that was the first time that I was out of school and I didn't have a teacher. So that was really hard for me. That's something that isn't, if it's not that when you just are starting out, when you're younger, it's all the time. It's hard.
Yeah.
Right. And even my teacher, I have to say, so I grew up in Kentucky and then went to Curtis, and my teachers there were a lot less interested in telling me and showing me how to play the violin than I thought they would be. I think their expectation was, you figure this out because that's you're supposed to know how to do that by now. And that I understand now later on that wasn't really their attitude, but that's how it seemed to me at the time because I was used to someone really showing me each step of the way. And that was hard for me because I was trying to make these musical shapes and satisfy my teacher's desires without exactly knowing how to get there. And so as you do, you spend a lot of energy and spend a lot of time going in all different directions without knowing which one is the one that's going to get you there.
Yeah, totally. So question for you, Nathan, if you were able to call, Nathan at Curtis today and kind of say, hey, Nathan, this is Nathan. These are some of the things that I've learned by practicing. And this is what got me a great job with a phenomenal orchestra. What are some of the things that you would tell young Nathan?
First of all, I would tell me to go to more live performances. There were tons of opportunities for that at Curtis, and I took advantage of some of them. Mm-hmm. I would go see my friends play. But by coincidence, the teachers I was studying with there didn't yet have studio classes that happened every week. Some teachers did, some teachers didn't. And because mine didn't, and I didn't seek out the chance to go to other teachers' studio classes, I missed that sort of weekly accountability and seeing what happens when people play live under pressure. Because everybody knows playing for your friends, people your own age, that's some of the hardest playing you do, because the comparison is unavoidable.
So how, going to those live performances, how did that, like going back to, setting goals for yourself, how would that affect, what goal, how do you figure out what goals to set for yourself? And then how do you sort of approach those?
Well, I would have immediately seen what other people were doing. And this did happen for the performances I did go to. You see what other people are doing and you say, oh, well, I want that, and I want to be able to make that kind of sound. I want to be able to play runs like this. I want these kind of confident starts to the phrases or to the lines that this person has. And maybe it's not even your own instrument. Maybe, you hear a horn player and you're like, wow, this sound is so compelling. I really felt like it developed over the course of a single long note. I want to do that. And when you have those wants and those desires, then your goals almost get set automatically. And then you can step by step work toward that. And then you can ask your teacher help. Here's where I want to go, but I don't know how to get there. If I had done that, my teachers would certainly have said, oh, okay, well, here's how I did it, or here's what I think are the best steps for you. So that would have been number one, more live performances to help set those goals. And I should say, too, to get a realistic sense of what happens in live performance. I listen to a lot of recordings, and nowadays, we know it's easier than ever to listen to all kinds of recordings. Actually, maybe now is a little better. When I was going to school, recordings meant professional, released commercial recordings. And if that's all you listen to, you get kind of a skewed sense of how people play. There are a few people that play exactly like they do on the CD, but CDs had and have a lot of editing. That's just how it works. And when you see people play live, you see some flaws, and you see which ones matter and which ones don't, and how people recover from flaws. And that would have given me actually more confidence to have seen that and to realize, hey, people are struggling with the same things, but this person's a great performer because that didn't even factor into the audience's enjoyment.
Okay, so since we're talking about efficient practice routines, now that you've set your goals, can you talk about actual specific steps, like with a hypothetical goal that you might have, how would you do it on a daily or a routine basis to kind of accomplish that?
I can speak, just about all the advice is general to all instruments. For violin and for strings, I like to generally break down practice time into fundamentals. Let's say scales or etudes that I'm going to work on for the rest of my life. These are things that are constant maintenance. Second category would be weaknesses that I'm working on right now, but not in the repertoire. So those would be etudes that are maybe they're temporary. And then the third section is the repertoire. And repertoire would get So maybe it's half for the repertoire, a quarter for the daily fundamentals, and a quarter for temporary weaknesses. That's how I like to break it down in my own mind. And so if your repertoire, let's say it's a solo recital with an hour's music, then you see where you are, where you're starting. You know, if you're 6 weeks out and there are 2 out of the 3 pieces that you can play through, no problem. The third one you can't even really get through. Obviously, that's the first step. You got to get that last piece to where you're getting through it so that you can work on the interpretation. So any technical weaknesses that are preventing you from getting through the piece in one steady tempo, those you have to break out and work on them in your etudes and scales. Once you can get through all the material, then you start raising the level of all of it. So I like to record myself pretty early in the process. That's something that's much easier to do now than ever before too, because even with the smartphone, just turn it on, either audio or video, whatever's your pleasure. And that can help you set a direction, you know, and it can keep you from wasting time, keep you from putting half of your practice time into some tiny thing that's only going to make a tiny bit of difference in the performance.
Right.
Yeah.
How does that for a start?
No, that's great. I mean, 2 things just going off of that. When I was in my undergrad and even admittedly like in my master's, I like probably wasn't doing enough recording as I should have, because I wasn't really like seeing the benefit of it directly. But once you do it repeatedly, you can see like, oh wow, I'm like not playing that note with the same color as this note at all. And it's just really obvious, even with a smartphone nowadays. Like you kind of course, maybe the audio isn't as good as, for example, like a Zoom recorder or like even a professional recorder, but you still get a really good idea of like if you're playing one note louder than another or things like that you can fix right away. And then just, I mean, going off of the whole targeting your weaknesses in your practice session, I think that's a really great thing, because obviously we all have weaknesses that we need to work on pretty much all the time. And I mean, especially in my own practice session, I find that I need to work on those weaknesses almost every day to try to like get them to a point where I can, you know, rely on them on a daily basis. Bill Vermeulen, who plays principal horn with the Houston Symphony, who teaches at Rice, he was here last week, and he was talking about trying to master an instrument and like how kind of like broad or general a term that is. And he said that mastery should be defined as kind of if you can play any note with any color at any dynamic with any articulation at any, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just to be able to play any note at any given circumstance is kind of how you should approach mastery. So sometimes I have my students say that they maybe don't have anything to practice, and I'm like, well, can you play this super low note really loud, or can you play this really high note really soft? And then oftentimes they kind of look at me and they're like, no. And I'm like, then why didn't you practice that? So, yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add about that.
No, well, not necessarily, but I guess what I got from what you were talking about was just being like really organized, like setting a goal and then like figuring out how you're going to get there. And I think like when I would have, you know, when I was teaching, I'm not teaching at the moment here, but my students used to say like, oh, I practiced so much, but like they don't really feel like they're getting anywhere. And they, you know, they're like, oh, I practiced like 8 hours this week. And like, they didn't learn like what they needed to, or, you know, they're setting a goal for themselves, but then they get lost in how to get there. So sorry, go ahead.
One thing that helped me eventually when I started taking orchestra auditions, that I think can help the efficiency and give it a jump start, was that I finally figured out that I needed to be ready a lot earlier than I had been. You know, I was gearing everything toward, okay, I'm going to have everything in place and everything is going to be great on the day of performance. So it's going to be like improvement up until that day. and then it's all going to come together. And just like that, it's your eventual performance is going to be the average of maybe the last 30 days of your playing. And so if you're improving for the last 30 days, of course your performance is going to be down here because it's going to be somewhere in the last 30 days. So if you get yourself to performance level a whole month before the date, then you can use that last month to relax certain aspects, to do more recording, to shape it, and to just sit in it and get comfortable. Then your performance will be up near the top of your capabilities. That was huge for me when I started taking auditions.
Okay.
Because I know some people that I coach, it's 3 weeks before the audition and they don't even quite have all the music there. They're flipping through a backpack for the music, and it's like, a month before it should all be in a book together, and you should have made your big decisions about tempos and bowings and fingerings, and you should be able to play it all. And then that last month is getting comfortable with it.
So what are some of the things that you, resource-wise, would use to kind of dictate decisions that you just talked about? So like, for example, like tempo, interpretation, things like that. How would you approach that before you actually put the violin in your hands?
Well, the pure answer to that is to get a score for all your pieces. But I can't say that I did that for every piece that I've auditioned on. I think it's important. Violinists are usually lucky in that if we're talking about an orchestral piece, if you have the complete part, it looks and sounds like a piece of music. That's not going to be true necessarily for every instrument. I mean, certain instruments have the melody a lot lower percentage of the time than violins, and so you can't even begin to approach what all the instruments have. With violin, you can make it sound like something, but still, at the very least, you need to listen to a performance of the piece. I don't think you have to get crazy saying this orchestra does this tempo and this one does that tempo. The most important thing, honestly, is just to make a decision and to have some musical reasons for it. And you leave room to change your mind later. But the most damaging thing is not making a decision or waffling up until the day of. So like I say, if a month before, whether we're talking about an audition or any kind of performing, if you're saying that this is pretty much how I hear this music, then you can shape it from there. I don't know if that completely answers what you're asking, but recordings, scores.
So like so when you were taking auditions, and so your first step would be to get a score, listen to the music, and write in sort of tempos and bowings, those kinds of things. And then is that like, what would you do after that? Would you like start at a really slow tempo, metronome work? You mentioned like recording yourself. Did you have like a process that you went through?
Yeah. So let's say it is an audition, and now we can get even more specific. So I would usually start preparing, let's say 8 to 10 weeks out, because that's usually when the openings were advertised. Maybe you'd get 3 months, but so as soon as the thing's advertised and I get the list, then I make my book, and that's going to have all the music in it, just the music that I would play in the audition. I'm not talking scores or any of that. I mean, that I can keep separate, but I'd make the book so that it was all in one place, and I'd use that book from that day until audition day, including the audition itself. And then yes, I would take recordings, scores, and just make a preliminary decision. This is about the tempo that I hear this music. This is the style, the character. I'll be using these kinds of sounds. And then with the instrument, over the next, let's say, 2 weeks, make my decisions about bowings and fingerings. And those are subject to change too, but that would be, when you ask if I would start really slow and do metronome work, this would be the time for that for some of the excerpts. I wouldn't automatically do them all slowly, because some of them just came together without needing that, but some of them certainly needed some work even to get to a ballpark tempo where I could intelligently make decisions. That's the thing I notice a lot of people lose track of too. If you're practicing something slowly for a long time and you're far from the eventual performance tempo, you might not even be in a position yet to say what your articulation is going to be, or what fingerings are going to work, or bowings, other technical matters. So you've got to move through that process quickly and efficiently. Metronome is a great tool. I use it every day.
Do you have any other tools?
Sorry. No, I mean the metronome and the recorder, and then just journal, whether that's pen and paper or on the computer, to literally keep track of what I'm practicing every day. Because it's easy, whether you're talking about a 4-piece recital or a 20, or for horn, probably 30 excerpt audition. It can be hard to remember. You'll think you've practiced something in the last couple of days, but then you look back and, oh, it's actually been 5 days. And you don't want that. You want to move through these things with some kind of system.
Do you have personally?
Up, perhaps.
I'm curious because I've heard it's not useful, obviously, to practice. You can't practice every excerpt every day. So do you sort of put them in groups and rotate them? But sorry, this is really specific.
No,
this
is really
I'm just curious what you do for
absolutely.
learning a lot of excerpts.
Let's say you've got 16 excerpts in an audition. You just write down each of the 16 ones on a scrap of paper, you put them all in a bowl, and then you draw 8 pieces, and then you've got 2 lists. You may even do 3 lists if you're a month out. You may put together 3 lists, each with 5 or 6 selections on them. And then you just have an A day, a B day, and a C day. And you do that for a week. Then you mix them all up, and maybe at that point you're 4 weeks out or 3 weeks out. And at that point you want only 2 lists. You want to do things every other day. But you switch up the lists every week. So you've got an A and a B, but then that won't be the same A and B as the next week. And then, finally 10 days before, you can be practicing everything every day, because at that point you're basically running things, or you're hitting just the openings of excerpts, which are the most important, the first impression of each excerpt. So that's how I split it up. And just another word about practicing the beginnings of these. I'm a big visualizer, big believer in that, doing mental practice away from the instrument. And with that, I have an opening routine for every single excerpt. And that takes me from the rest position, where the violin's down at my side, starts with an unknown voice, let's say, calling out, okay, Mozart, 40th Symphony, turning the page, getting my tempo, putting the instrument up, and starting with the specific motions of that excerpt. And I do that for every single one. That's for solo recitals and concertos too.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think the mental game is so important. It's often something that a lot of musicians don't practice, leading up to an audition, because they're so focused on the music and the excerpts and things like that. But just, if we can just take a little bit of a turn, I think this is a really common way to work on auditions. Of course, the A list, B list, C list, et cetera, for professional auditions. But for example, if you were a high school student, I think this is also a really relevant way to work on auditions too, because it's not feasible to work on everything every single day. But if you break up I'm going to work on, for example, if you have a college audition coming up and you have 3 pieces and some excerpts and some etudes, then you can do a solo piece every day, an etude every day and a couple excerpts every day, and then you're breaking up your practice sessions into something really kind of
something you can achieve.
Exactly, yeah. Instead of just like trying to do everything at once. So I don't know if you have any kind of additional thoughts for high school age students who are maybe working on college audition stuff right now.
Well, what I did when I was in high school is, again, with a recorder. For each piece, you just mentioned maybe practicing different pieces every day. Another way to approach it too is, let's say your entire program takes 60 minutes to play. Whole 60 minutes in one go, and then you go listen to it, and in each piece you limit yourself to just 3 trouble spots. And a trouble spot could be as little as 1 measure, or maybe as big as 4 lines, not to make it any longer than that. But each piece has only 3, and you order them 1, 2, 3 for each piece. So if you've got 6 selections, then you've got 18 trouble spots, and you work on all the 1s first, then the 2s, and then the 3s. And that's all you would do for that day, and maybe even the next day. You could fill 2 whole days with just those spots. And then the day after, you run the whole thing again, because the places that aren't trouble spots may not need daily attention. And it may actually do you some good, the mental interference and constant criticism.
Yeah, that's great. We're kind of running out of time now, but I don't know, Nathan, if you have any kind of like last minute things you wanted to like sneak in there. Yeah. I'm sure that everyone listening would really like to know just kind of a few things that you think were really impactful in developing your routine.
If I could leave everyone with just one thing, it would be to constantly change the rules of your practice so that you're succeeding. A more negative way to say that is don't play wrong things, which I know sounds silly and obvious, but that could be as simple as slowing down the tempo. Everybody knows you got to do slow practice, but it literally means play at the tempo where you can play everything well. The more times you miss notes, miss rhythms, that will find its way into your performance. So start caring for your practice or curating your practice.
Actually,
so that you're always playing well.
A question from the audience related to that. Someone has asked, or Justin has asked, do you recommend any exercises for speeding up your left hand specifically?
Yeah, the best one I like is grouping notes, and I actually made a YouTube video on that. Grouping notes, violin practice, grouping notes, so you can see that. But it's slow and fast practice at the same time, because you first work in super quick groups of 2, but with spaces in between, and then super quick groups of 3, etc. That combined with a light finger pressure, the minimum finger pressure, speed up the left hand.
That was actually from Laura. Not Justin, sorry. But that was really helpful. Maybe we can,
if you're out there, that'll help.
Maybe we can put in a link for that video in this live chat or in NWS Connect. So yeah, we'll look for that.
That's one of the best features about live streaming our videos on Facebook, is that we can continue the conversation after the video is done. So if you have any questions for Nathan or have any questions for Caroline or I, then we can answer those after the fact. So if you missed out,
feel free to post them on the live video or NWS Connect or Mosaic. We'll see them.
Yeah,
anywhere,
definitely. So we just wanted to quickly thank you, Nathan, for spending the time with us. I really appreciate all your kind of insight, and I'm sure everyone else does too. Yeah, we both do. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And we just wanted to let you know that our next Hangout is going to be on December 6th, and it's going to be entitled How to Listen. So stay tuned for that.
Okay.
And I think we're all set. So thanks a lot, Nathan.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you at the next Hangout.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
All right.